Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Under the Mango Tree. My name is MJ Fievre, and I will be your host for this special Black History Month episode. I'm the author of the Badass Black Girl series. I'm originally from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, but I've made Florida my home for the past 20 years. We have three esteemed guests with us today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Shanisha Boswell is here, Marita Golden, and Kristina Daniele. Let's start with you, Shanicia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shanisha Boswell. I am founder of Black Moms Blog. We talk parenting, culture, and lifestyle from a Black mom's point of view. I'm also one of Mango's authors for Oh Sis, You're Pregnant.
Thank you. A well-needed book for sure, Marita.
Hi, I'm Marita Golden. I am a novelist, essayist, and cultural activist and co-founder of the Zora Neale Hurston Richard Wright Foundation. And I'm a member of the Mango family. And Mango released about 3 months ago my book, which you see behind me, the poster, The Strong Black Woman.
Thank you for being here. Kristina. Hi.
Hi, I'm Kristina Daniele, and I am an author and educator. I'm the author of Civil Rights Then and Now, which was re-released this month by Mango. And I pretty much spend my days researching different ways of helping my child and other children learn about our rich history and culture.
Thank you so much for being here. February is dedicated to Black History Month. We honor the triumphs, the struggles of African Americans throughout US history. The theme for 2022 focuses on the importance of Black health and wellness. This theme acknowledges the legacy of not only Black scholars and medical practitioners in Western medicine, but also other ways of knowing the individuals, birth workers, doulas, midwives, naturopaths, herbalists, all those people who are part of the African diaspora. The 2022 theme considers activities, initiatives that Black communities have done as well. So to kickstart this conversation, I want to begin with a topic close to Shanicia's heart, Black maternal health. I will start with some statistics. In the US, the CDC reported that Black women experience maternal mortality at a rate 2 to 3 times higher than that of white women. And multiple factors contribute to these disparities, including variation in quality healthcare, underlying chronic conditions, structural racism, implicit bias. And we have a book like Oh Sis, You're Pregnant. And Shanicia, I'm curious about that book. It comes at a crucial time in, dare I say, history to serve the gap that Black women have been looking for. Tell us a little bit about the motivation for you to write this book and maybe your favorite chapters. And I'm also curious about the feedback your book has received within the community.
Yes. So I had my daughter at 23 years old. I was pregnant at 22. I birthed her at 23. And I always say that being pregnant at 22 felt like being pregnant in high school. There just wasn't a lot of support around, I would say, millennial motherhood, but also being a Black mother. I didn't have a lot of support around me. It was a thing of going into a hospital and feeling like I wasn't supposed to be there, being talked down upon by the nurses and the doctors. And so in my own motherhood journey, my daughter is now 9 years old. This was a book that lived inside of me before I even realized it was there. It was my experience. It was the experience of many women that I speak to through my blog about their experiences with motherhood. And we all know about what to expect when you're expecting. That was kind of like the rites of passage book. But when you read that book, there wasn't anything in there, one, that connected to my own personal experience. And it also was, it just didn't feel like someone was talking to me. It felt like a medical term. You know, it's like the thing that you go back and you kind of recite and you look through things. But I wanted to create a book that women actually read from the beginning to the end. And so Osis tends to do that. It's a book that is, it's funny, but it's factual, it's educational, but it's also supposed to make you feel like you're speaking to your best friend about childbirth. And so one of my favorite chapters in that book is a chapter really that I wrote for myself when I went through it, was, hey, single mama, you're not alone, right? And it's a chapter that, even though it's speaking about single motherhood, it's also speaking about women getting back into their own personal self-care after having a baby and relying on their community to come in and help them in a way that as Black women, we tend not to do. We don't ask for help all the time. And so in that chapter, it's because motherhood is not just about the baby, it's also about the mom. And so I really wanted to cater to the mothers reading the book and not just make it all about baby.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shanicia. And my next question is actually for all three of you, because correct me if I'm wrong, all three of you are mothers. I wanted to know what is something that many people do not know about Black maternal health, and what are some of the pieces of advice that you received and that you wished that you have known sooner and that you can share with other women now?
I'm happy to share. I had my child, Maya, I was in my late 20s. I was married. And still, when people looked at me, when doctors looked at me, they felt the need to lecture me about protection. I was like, my pregnancy was planned. I think there's a lot of stigma with being Black and pregnant, period. Like, people just assume that you are statistically, away. And so it's really important, I think, when you are a pregnant Black woman or a pregnant Black person, I'm sorry, it's very important to have someone who can advocate for you on your behalf, who is there to make sure the doctors and the nurses and the medical staff treat you with respect. I was lucky that my husband was around, because I had some serious complications during my pregnancy and during my labor. And I'm also allergic to penicillin. And I was almost given penicillin. So, it was nice to have my husband there and just, wait, no, make sure nobody gives her penicillin. It was just really good to have someone who could speak up for me. So I think if for other Black women who are going through pregnancy, find someone who can be with you, who can advocate for you. And I know it's not easy for everyone, but if it's possible, try and find someone.
Yeah, I think I would continue the conversation around community and family support. My son will be on Valentine's Day 44. And so my maternal experience is pretty far back in my personal history. But he was born in Nigeria. And I do recall very fondly and with a great deal of appreciation that he was born into a culture where it was normal. It was normative for example, the mother-in-law to come and stay for a couple of months. And even though I was not fluent in my husband's language, which was Yoruba, I could speak enough to communicate with her. And it was very helpful, just knowing that I could rely on someone who had multiple births and who had a kind of wisdom that comes from the bones that I couldn't read in a book. And my sister-in-law was enormously helpful. So I think community is really, really important. And I think that that's one of the fault lines in our community, where the wisdom that many Black mothers have about childbirth is not passed down to subsequent generations.
That's right.
I think it's so important about the stories, talking and passing things down. I personally my husband and I went through a loss a couple of years before we had my child. And I didn't know how common loss was until I went through it and began speaking about it. And I think there's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, and we don't talk enough about the fact that pregnancy is not easy at all, that it's dangerous, right? It can be very dangerous. Even under the best circumstances, it doesn't always end positively. And people don't talk about that. And so it's easy to feel very alone. So yeah, the community aspect and sharing stories is so important.
Yeah, I think for me, when it comes to Black maternal health, I think it's important for women to remember that pregnancy is amazing, right? I remember last year, we have Black maternal health once a year in April, and it felt extremely heavy. And I had this conversation with another mom that works in blogging, and we both said the same thing, right? It was like we start the statistics off the same way every year. This amount of women die during childbirth, this happens. And, for us that had babies before the internet was like this big booming thing, we went into it with maybe some of the negligences, right, of medical staff, but we didn't have those facts, right? And so while those facts are important, they can be really, really heavy and scary on new mothers, right? And so you have a lot of women that are, and I see it every day when I talk to women on the blog, they're afraid to have babies. They're like, oh my God, this is the most frightening thing ever to think that this could happen. And so I think that when it comes to Black maternal health, keeping that conversation real, because we do need to know these things. These are things that can save our life. They're factual statistics that tell us the truth, but also making sure that we highlight the beautiful part of it. Just like Ms. Golden said about, I had community. This brought me in closer to my mother-in-law and my sister, and these women showed up for me. I think that's the other really positive part of Black maternal health, that we have to not to hide any of the facts, right? Because they're quote unquote scary, because we need to know them, but also to just make it full circle. And it doesn't sound like the conversation is always so like, I don't want to get pregnant, I'm scared I'm going to die, no one's going to listen to me. Like that can become a really heavy energy when it comes to childbirth. When it comes to Black women, we're always being told that we're going to die. And that can be frightening.
I really love this idea of community, and it made me think about this idea of the strong Black woman and how we don't have to be strong on our own, right? We can rely on our members of our community. And speaking of the strong Black woman, this is a phrase that I'm sure we'll all heard, this idea that Black women in America feel pressured to act like superwomen, projecting themselves as strong, self-sacrificing, free of emotion, often to cope with the stress of race and gender-based discrimination in their daily lives. And Marita, you talk about that in your book, which is titled The Strong Black Woman. Let's talk a little bit about that. For generations, in response to systemic racism, we've created this persona. So we sacrifice, handle, manage, overcome problems. We overcome any obstacles because we're strong. Tell us about the dangers of this approach. Tell us a little bit about what motivated you to write the book.
Well, I had kind of a little minor health scare, which wasn't really a scare, but it did reveal when I had an MRI that sometime in the distant past, I'd had 2 silent strokes. And silent strokes are very, very common. I mean, more people have silent strokes than debilitating lethal strokes, but it's still a stroke. And I had erected this image of myself as invincible, because when I saw my mother die when I was 21 and my father when I was 23, I decided to be very, very healthy. So I spent much of my life exercising, watching my weight, watching my diet, meditating, having a wide circle of friends. And so when I discovered that I'd had these 2 strokes, I really felt kind of shaken to the core. But at the same time, I have stroke in my family. I have heart attack in my family. So I went home and I got thinking about Black women's health, and I did a little research on the internet and saw that there's this very vibrant conversation going on now about dismantling the strong Black woman complex. And our mothers and grandmothers lived at a time when this dismantling simply wasn't possible. They lived at a time before the civil rights movement, before feminism, before Oprah had opened all the doors and brought everything out of the closet. There was simply no language to interrogate a complex, a system of beliefs that was actually very harmful. And what's happening is that African-American women are in a health emergency. Very high rates of diabetes, cardiac problems, stroke. And when I was writing the book, I didn't want the book to be all about those negative statistics. I wanted it to be a hopeful, uplifting book, where in the book, for example, you hear the voices of Black women talking about going into therapy and how therapy helped them heal. I talk about the power of affirmative stories. So I found myself enrolling in a kind of army of scholars, writers, activists, doctors, all working to dismantle the toxic aspects of being a strong woman and becoming a new age strong Black woman who can ask for help, who admits to vulnerability, who knows that she deserves joy, and who finds time in her day and in her life to celebrate herself.
This is beautiful. And I talk to so many women who feel, Black women who feel that they have to do more than their peers to be acknowledged. They have to show that they're strong. And Marita, you give some great advice. You talk about therapy, about asking for help. And I'm curious about what other steps and resources you have, and by you, I mean the group here, for women who feel that they're having a hard time dealing with the myth of the strong Black woman.
Well, I think it's important to recognize that there's nothing wrong with your feelings, with feeling overwhelmed, feeling ignored. I mean, Dr. Aubrey Chapman said to me that the Black woman in America is the most ignored and neglected woman in America. She's neglected by her family as well as herself. So the feelings that we have, we often feel guilty if we want to take time for ourselves. That's nothing to feel guilty about. And we're really talking about moving into this attitude bit by bit. It's not something that you can dismantle over the weekend, but a series of small steps that become integral to your daily life will help you dismantle it.
I love that you spoke about how our mothers and our grandmothers didn't have the opportunities that we have today. And I say that all the time. This generation that we're currently in, when it comes to so many things, we have so much support, right? We have the support of the internet. We have the support of sister circles and these gatherings that we have that we can release, we can cry. We have Black women therapy groups now. We have all of these levels of support. And so I love that instead of, like you said, necessarily like dismantling the term, rewriting it, because I'm a woman that, I've always struggled with that word strong. I literally made this post on Instagram about, don't call me a strong Black woman. Here's a list of other words that you can use instead of strong. And those words included things like soft, vulnerable, God-fearing, submissive and loving, and just all these different things, because there is this rap that comes now with being a strong Black woman that is somehow it became negative. And that's just because of the times that we're in, where we're very word sensitive. You have to be careful of the words that you use, because these words carry on these different meanings. And ultimately it's getting to the point of saying, hey, I need help, right? And a lot of us, a lot of Black women were raised by single mothers. And so they've been raised seeing their mothers do everything on their own, to the point where they forgot that they could ask for help. And remembering that us asking for help now, like you said, changes everything. Our parents maybe didn't have that. Our grandmothers weren't able to do that. You knew to do what you were supposed to do, and that was it. And so we're almost like finding a way to take that word back and understand that the strength in a woman, in a Black woman, is not a negative thing, but it's something that we've been conditioned to be. But at other times, it's like, how do we keep that idea of the strong Black woman, but also make it to where she's open and vulnerable enough to say, hey, can you help me? I do need my community to love me.
for a long time, I rejected the strong Black woman label. I probably still do. I'm not really big on labels, period. But I find that a lot of it is based on this idea that our parents, our single mothers, did everything themselves when they didn't. They did. They carried a lot of weight. But I think we forget to look at how much support we've seen our parents get. We forget that our neighborhoods, I know I grew up in the Bronx, and I'm 44. My neighborhood was my village. My next door neighbors checked on us when my mom was working double shifts. I stayed at neighbor's house. And so while I do see my mom as a strong Black woman, I also recognize that this idea of the village, the community, has existed in various forms outside of what we see and are told is community, right? And even family. I mean, Black women are notorious for creating families out of nothing, right? We piece them together with everything. And so I actually have a point. I just lost it for a second.
I feel like you were saying that the community has always been there, right?
Right, that the community has always, right.
Ask for the help. Yeah.
Thank you. And that being strong, part of being strong is asking for help. That is huge. And we see it as a weakness, but it's such a strength to just simply say, I need a little help with this today, and recognizing our personal limits and understanding that our no's are complete sentences. We don't have to provide explanations. If we don't have the energy for something, say no, and it's okay. The world will continue to go on if you step back. And I say this, but I struggle with it so much.
Yeah. The no with the explanation, right? You always feel like you have to, it's like a thing as a woman, you want to say I'm sorry all the time. Right. And you notice it, right? Someone bumps into you and you say I'm sorry.
Right.
As or yeah.
Mm-hmm. Or you want to say no if it's all right with you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Mm-hmm.
There was something about the conversation around the way that we send emails and the way that we speak as women, right? And we'll say, well, I think, when in reality, I know. I'm just trying to be humble about knowing. Right. Or, it's like the way that we form our words, and words have such power. We know this as writers. They have so much power, and how much we minimize ourselves in our words. And we put these kind of like passive adjectives in front of things so that we don't appear to be too much, or the LOL or the smiley face or the exclamation mark. And you see this a lot especially in my field of mom blogging. We answer everything with a heart. And it's like, can I just say what I want to say without, can I put a period at the end of this? Like, is that going to be okay? So all because we don't want to appear, because I think that's the thing, like Kay was saying, we now associate strong with aggression. And it's not aggression. And we shouldn't have to soften so much. It's like we're turning into a puddle of mud at this point. Like, can I say how I feel?
And we talk a lot about language, but I've often been told that I am aggressive, and I'm like, I'm not aggressive. I'm assertive. I'm totally assertive, and I will tell you what I need, and I speak up for myself and for those in need. But it comes across as aggressive because I am setting boundaries and I am saying no and telling you what I need. And I think that part of, we have these coded language, right? It's like we say strong to Black women, but strong, depending on the context, can be a negative, right? If you're at a job and they're like, oh, she's so strong, they don't really mean anything positive by it, And so there is that, you're getting mixed messages from different areas of what strong means and what it means to be a strong woman and a strong Black woman. And it's just, I think that is so confusing and stressful to most people. You
never hear that term in any other race. You never hear strong white woman,
right?
Strong Latina woman. You know, you don't hear that. And the reality is we have been through a lot more. And I don't want to make it a more or less war in that kind of way, but we have had to be stronger. But it is and I think this is really generational too, right? And it's just like, you know, I'm 32. So we all are falling into a different generation. And I always like to think that our mothers and the mothers before our mothers made things easier for us. And so certain words that have a typical weight or a meaning, they change throughout every generation. And so as we get into a stage as a Black woman where even though we still have our struggle, our lives are substantially more easy than our parents and their parents, because they made it that way. They fought for us to have the privileges that we have now. And so when we hear a word like that, we're like, what? But for them, it meant something different because that really was an act of strength. It's like for me to go to, you know, my child's school and make sure that they can go to a school that's integrated, that is strength, that is power, you know. And so the word has just taken on different meanings through the generations, and it's changing. It's changing.
And I think it's a great segue to the next part of our conversation, this idea of leaning into community, of being assertive, but also recognizing the wisdom that comes from understanding how things change from one generation to the next. And one thing that kept coming back to me, one word, was this idea of education, particularly when you, Marita, you mentioned how much you learned from your mother-in-law when she came to assist you during the pregnancy. And the fact that we are having this conversation and kind of enlightening each other. One way for sure to dispel stereotypes and myths is through education. There is so much information going around nowadays. We want to make sure that our next generation receives proper education so as to break vicious cycles. And Kristina, you wrote Civil Rights Then and Now. It's an information-packed social justice book and civil rights timeline. You introduced readers to a selection of many critical civil rights movement facts, moments, historical events. And in today's climate, it's more important than ever to have these important conversations with our kids around racism and some of the issues linked to racism, like Black health. So tell us a little bit about your motivations for this book and what you were hoping that readers, kids would take away from it.
Sure. Well, first, let me start by saying that I was a classroom teacher for 5 years. I taught English, and I loved being a teacher. I loved the connection with the students, but I did not enjoy the way curricula was developed and way classes are run. And so Maya was 3 when I decided to leave the classroom and work from home and be a homeschooling mom. And I was blogging and doing a lot of other things, and mostly writing education plans and lesson plans. And I would write education, like just lesson plans for books that I was using with my child. And that kind of spiraled with me really focusing on history from a Black American point of view. And I'm interracially married. My husband is white Italian, but we've always been a Black centered home. In that everything has been taught from a perspective of Black history is world history, right? And so as I started writing lessons and really interacting with people who didn't really know a lot about the civil rights movement or about African-American history, I felt kind of compelled to just write more and to share lessons with people, because I thought that maybe the problem is that we're just ignoring all of the aspects of American history, right? We're only focused on one portion of American history. and we talk a lot about slavery, but we don't talk a lot about the effects of slavery, the impact that it has had generations down the road, right? And how this idea of broken families, that all stems from families being decimated through the slave trade. And so this book just, it kind of spilled out of me. It's short, but it probably could have been like 17 books in one, because there's so much information. But I just really wanted to give parents, teachers, a way to engage their students, their children, in conversations about very real firsthand accounts of how racism impacts the entire world. And so that's where the book came from.
It's such a wonderful book to empower the youth. And I'm wondering, in the age of social media, what is one thing, in addition to reading books by Black women and other Black authors, what is one thing that we can do to ensure that Black history is celebrated and amplified?
Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of Black History Month as a concept, only because I think people tend to only focus on that 28-day period of celebrating Black history. So I think the number one thing we can do is honestly share facts about Black achievements, accomplishments of truth. Just share them widespread, everywhere. Talk about them, read different books, engage with people, have real conversations with people. I think we've lost that. We don't talk to people anymore. And so we don't share those stories. Like Marita said, we have to share those affirmations and those stories of affirmation.
I would like to think that teaching our children that Black history doesn't start with slavery. We have so much history that starts before slavery in America. And I understand we're talking about African American history, but African is a part of that African history. And we had kings and queens and civilizations and Mansa Musa. We had all these wonderful things, right? And I always say, like, think about you take two children, take a Black child and a white child, and you put them in kindergarten together. And from kindergarten all the way up through high school, all they're taught about is African American slavery history. And that white child walks away, feeling, probably a little bad, but they weren't a slave. And the Black child is told from the time they're in kindergarten to 18 that their ancestors were enslaved the entire time and in chains. And it creates a very interesting dynamic for the children. And we don't recognize it as adults, but you fill that up in a classroom. And this is what's being drilled into them for 18 years in education, right? That my people were slaves, and my people were slave owners, and it's this really uncomfortable divide. And so I feel like there has to be something that is taught in schools that work to empower Black children, and not saying that Harriet Tubman isn't empowering, because she is, Martin Luther King is empowering, but that puts them in the same space, the same way that we learn about these kings and queens in Europe. We have that. We have so much of that. And that part, it's almost in the responsibility of the parents, because schools aren't teaching that. And so the parent can't put everything on the school system. The parent has to say, this is what I'm going to teach my child about their own history. I'm going to teach them about the 54 beautiful countries in Africa, right? Because Africa is not a country, it's a continent. And so like all of these things, like that relies heavily on the parent saying, I want to educate my child. How do I do it?
Well, my father made my bedtime stories of Black people of achievement. Literally every night he told me about someone like Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth. He told me that Egypt was an African country, and he normalized Black history. It was just a normal thing for him to talk to me about that. I don't ever remember reading books about Black history until I was, older. But when I was younger, my bedtime stories literally were about Black people who had distinguished themselves in our history. And it's a normal thing. And he was unconsciously telling me that I could be bold and brave as they were.
And I think the dismantling of the education system is a necessary step into normalizing Black history, right? As part of history, right? It's not, and I struggle with the term Black history because it's history. It's not Black history, it's history, period. And if you're going to teach your child about the world, you're going to give them world history, then you have to include everything in some way. And it's a feat. But one of the things that I think that the pandemic is teaching us is that we have to rely on other sources, not just sending our kids to school and hoping the school will handle it. A lot of what I remember about being a teacher in the classroom was not engaging parents and thinking there's no way kids are going to learn if the parents aren't engaged, if the parents aren't learning as well, because school is only 180 days.
Indeed. Thank you so much for this. And you're so right, discovering our history and our potential through books like Oh Sis, You're Pregnant by Shanicia, The Strong Black Woman by Marita, and Civil Rights Then and Now, such a great way to celebrate Black history. That's all the time we have for today. I could talk to you guys for hours. Thank you for coming and
Thank you.
with us this
Thank
afternoon.
you. Thank you.